Bush, and today we're going to have some fun with thinking particles. Okay, I call them jelly particles because of this way we're going to work with them. Now you may ask, well, why would you even mess with thinking particles? Some of you probably have X particles. I know I do. But all my tutorials work with what comes native to Cinema 4D because I don't want to create tutorials like an X particles tutorial. There's plenty of them out there, and people may not have X particles. So I do like working with things that are native to Cinema 4D because so many times I think we buy the plugin and just bypass it altogether. And I will say thinking particles is a bit challenging because of its unintuitive way of working, but there are some very cool things you can do with it. So if you've ever tried working with thinking particles, you may have become frustrated. I know I did when I started out with them, and still am a little bit actually. It's not as easy as the standard emitter where you throw it in and all of a sudden you've got particles. But what I'm going to show you today actually makes it a little more fun to work with thinking particles, and I think that the possibilities for this technique are just infinite and cool. So let's get started. So let's start out, go up here and let's get a null, and we're going to just call that TP, thinking particles. And let's go ahead and put an Xpresso tag on that. And we'll close that for now. And then let's go back up to simulate, thinking particles, and thinking particle setting. This is what you're going to use to set everything up. And so if you see down here, we're just going to leave all these other settings. But down here we got particle groups. And right now the group is all. Well, you'll see we're going to break this into 2 or 3 groups, and you'll see why. So let's just right click and say add. And let's go ahead and call this sphere. And let's go ahead and let's make it red for now. You can change that later or whatever. And the only reason I'm doing this is to keep these particle groups separated. And I can see it easily by color. And then we can change that later if we need to. This does not affect the color of the particles. We'll do that in a different way. So let's just leave this palette set up here. And I'm going to go back to my simulate and thinking particles and get particle geometry. All right. So we're just going to name this sphere, S-P-H-E-R-E, particle geometry. And while we're thinking of it, let's just go ahead and drag this group into our particle geometry field. So the sequence you do these steps isn't important, just to make sure you do get all the steps. So let's get a sphere. Let's make it about 150 radius, and that can actually sit right there. But I am going to add some more subdivisions, because in order for an object to become a deflector for thinking particles, it has to be converted to polygons. So I'm going to turn this on a second. Yeah, that's fine. I don't know that the amount of polygons matter, but I did want it smooth. That might be overkill, but that looks good. And let's go ahead and convert that. And then what I want to start off with, we're going to kind of build that thing at the very beginning of the tutorial that you saw. And by building that, you'll be able to, the techniques I use to build that are the same ones I used to build to do the faces, which is part of my Face of the Cosmos video. So now let's get a cone, like so. Pull that up here. So let's go ahead and rotate our cone 180. Okay. And we're going to need a plane. So let's go up here, get a plane. Let's make that 1000 by 1000. Oops. And subdivisions, you can just leave that where it is. Okay. Let's convert that. Oh, yes, that's going to be a deflector, so let's convert that. Okay, so this sphere is way too big. Well, instead of making a new one though, let's come down into our coordinates manager and just put in 150 in X, 150 in Y, and 150 in Z, and then hit apply. Ah, that's better. Okay, I got messed up somehow. Okay, so now we've got our sphere and our cone. Now this is where we're going to attach our particles to that. So that actually can stay as a primitive, which is good because we want to be able to adjust these segments quite a bit to add more particles. I'm not going to put a whole lot right now. I'm going to add a few and then in the cap segment, because you're going to see this is what creates some of the cool patterns. Okay, so all right, so that looks good for now. Okay, well, somewhere along the way I lost my thinking particles settings, so let's put that back up there. And we go ahead and set up our Xpresso. So what we want to do first is go into new nodes, thinking particles, and we need the initiator. This is where thinking particles gets a little, I don't know, it's just not very intuitive. So you just have to learn these steps and it'll all work out. So if you click on this node, now we have to tell this p pass what particles, particle pass, what particles it's going to pass to our next stage. Okay, so we don't want to pass all because we want to be able to affect particles in different ways. So for the sphere, which is going to be this first one, we're going to just drag that into the group field for this p-pass node. And while we're at it, just to keep things clean, I'm going to make this gray part, you'll see, the same color as our particles. So when I look into this Xpresso window, I'll immediately see, so this is the red particles or whatever. You know, we can change it later if we need to. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to set up our deflectors. So we're going to go to thinking particles and down in dynamic, okay, because that's actually not, oh actually, yeah it is, okay. So we're going to be using mostly dynamics here. So let's get the first deflector, and I think for right now we're just going to, let's click on that again. And if you go into the node parameters, okay, so the node doesn't help us. Parameters, you want to drag, let's drag the plane in for now, okay? And the deflector type, you can use some of these defaults, okay? But I'm going to use object, all right? So now that's referencing the plane we just dragged in. And I always set this to both sides. There may be times that you don't want both sides, that you could get some cool effects, that it bounces off or something and other particles go through, who knows. But anyway, so I set that, leave it at none. And for right now, we're just going to do the bounce, okay? And because I want the deflectors different from my other nodes, I'm going to set them at the default of just this greenish blue. So now at a glance, actually, let's, because I think the other particles may be that color. So let's just choose this color. Nope, didn't work. Okay, that'll work. So now at a glance, I'll be able to see, oh, my deflectors are all this yellow color or whatever. All right. So obviously, we still don't have any particles in our scene. We have it set up to deflect off the plane and all that, but we really don't have any particles. And this is kind of the cool thing that we're going to do next. And if you go into Mograph, let's grab a matrix object. And so we want to go into those matrix settings, and let's choose object. And the object we want to put our matrices on is our cone, okay? So I'm going to drag that in there, and suddenly you see that we have all these matrices, and they're aligned to the vertexes of this cone. And I'm going to put the cone above it because the matrix is referencing it. And I like to have the object that it's referencing above the either cloner or matrix. Okay, so with the matrix selected, if we go down here, you've got all these things, edge, surface, fine, but we're going to stay with the vertex. But in here it says generate matrices only. Well, there's also thinking particles, okay? So let's choose thinking particles, and all of a sudden you see that we have all these white thinking particles, all right? And we can see them better if we go ahead and hide the matrices, all right? So now we can see all these thinking particles, but for some reason they're white. Well, that is because it is reading all, and we don't want that. So let's go back into our matrix, and here it has a field for the TP group. So if we drop our TP group in there, now we have just our sphere particles, okay? And if we hit play, absolutely nothing is going to happen. And that is because all we've done is set up our particles so that they adhere to the vertices of this cone. Okay? So now let's go up and get another null. And this is where thinking particles gets a little tedious. We're going to call it gravity. Okay? And now we have to go back into our Xpresso tag, go back into new node, thinking particles, go back down to dynamic, and grab gravity. Now the gravity node, we're going to make a different color again, just to keep things a little clean in here. Let's go with this dark blue. Okay. It looks like gravity. Not really. Okay, so the gravity is also, everything in thinking particles comes in as none, all right, because it wants an object or something to direct it to what it's supposed to do. So this one's no different. We need an object, and our object is going to be, but I want to move this so you can see what happens. Our object is going to be our null that we just created. Now, which you can't see anyway, let's raise that up, and I'm going to get rid of that so we can do it again. All you're seeing now is the null, okay? But once we drag our gravity in, and it's set to planar, so it's directional, and now we see an arrow. So that means if we hit play now, still nothing is going to happen. And that's because we didn't hook it up. So now let's hook it up, and hopefully, there we go. All right. So what we want, of course, is right now is to make the gravity go down. All right. So I think we can close this. And if we hit play, particles should fall, and I can already see we're not going to have enough time, so let's put 500 frames. Okay. Now that's just bouncing off the plane. But already you can see that we've got some cool, like rubbery kind of action to this thing. Okay? So now let's go ahead and go back in here, and let's create a new node. Now, I'm going to create this new node this way, but you could just, okay, there's the deflector. All right. You can do it that way, or you can just hold down Control and drag click, and then just drop your new object in there, which I'm going to do. But it's good to get used to creating these things. So now we've got sphere. It shows us that it's a sphere. And let's go ahead and look at that. Now we've got a totally different deal. Okay. All right. Now one of the, beauties of thinking particles is that while it's a little tedious setting up these separate little nodes for each plane and each deflector and everything, this allows us to change the parameters in each of these deflectors. Okay, so let's go back into our deflector, and let's go into the sphere deflector. That's this one. And let's change our bounce down to 20, and let's change our friction up to 80. All right, and pull this down here. Actually, let's just close it. And so let's see what that does for us. So now we've got a very different behavior. Okay, so what's happening here is these particles are staying on the sphere more. They still have a little bit of bounce, okay, not a whole lot there. And these particles have bounced off of it a little bit and are bouncing now on the plane, which has 100% bounce, and then these particles have bounced completely back up. If you see, they're the ones that completely missed that sphere, okay? So all of a sudden, we've got some pretty cool action to our particles. All right, so let's get another sphere, okay? And we're going to go down here and create a hemisphere, all right? And pull that up, okay? And we want that turned around, so 180. And like before, let's give it a few more subdivisions because we're going to convert that. We're going to use this as a deflector. And let's go ahead and make the radius around 200 or so. And then we can stick that down in here. And this is all, I mean, every time you change the position of one of these things or whatever, it's going to change the reaction of the particles. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and let's get rid of that. Let's go ahead and convert this. All right, and it's a little straight on the sides. So let's hit your scale and just on scale tool and just on Y, scale this up so that we have a little more of a drastic bowl. Okay, maybe about there. And then let's hit play. May not get the effect we are going for yet. Yeah. Oops, yeah, we forgot to control drag. And let's drag the hemisphere in there. And let's make sure we hook this up. Oop. Okay. Now let's see. Okay, so they're stopping there. But we're going to do something to get a little more action in there. Let's go into our Xpresso. And in the sphere deflector, let's animate a couple of these parameters. I want to get a kind of an explosion. So let's see where these particles start hitting this sphere. We want them to get on the sphere. So about 95. Okay, let's start there. So, could have left that there. So 95. Let's go ahead and put a keyframe on bounce, which should be 20. And we're going to do surface, even though it's at 0 right now, and friction. All right. And then we're going to just move ahead 20 frames. So that would be about 115, I think. All right. And let's change this. You can right click on these two little arrows and it'll take it to 100. The surface, let's make it 100. So just type in 100. And then let's take the friction down to 10. All right. And we can close this. And let's see if we get more of a little bit of an explosion there. Not really. Okay, so I'm going to get into timeline dope sheet, go into our reflectors, hit S to frame them, and crunch it down a little bit. Um, and this is where the playing comes around. Let's go ahead and let's move it to 85 and see what that does. Well, that's better. Okay, let's move it to, let's try 90. We might even want to compress those together more. No, let's move it back to 80. Let's do something else though. Let's go up to our cone and increase these to, I don't know, around 30 something, 35, 70. It doesn't have to be exact right now. And then let's see what this does. It might slow us down a little bit, but we'll get a better sense of an explosion. There we go. That's more what I'm looking for. I want things to fly out of there. Okay. So, and let's even take this hemisphere and just move it down slightly. Maybe that'll help. So we get a little more spill. Okay. I'm good with that for now. One other thing we could do is go back in here to our hemisphere and let's up the bounce to say 50, and just so that the particles don't bounce and I'll go crazy, let's go ahead and put in 60 in surface, which means when it bounces it'll tend to crawl along the surface instead of just shooting out at an angle. And then let's decrease the friction a little so we get, plenty of movement in there. And let's see what that looks like. Now, because we've added all these particles, it's really slowing down our thing. But, whoa. Okay, so, all right, that's because I didn't realize I had 520 in there. Okay, well, that was kind of crazy. All right, so this should be a little more sane. Actually, let's crank that back up. Let's put it up to 80. I liked a little more action. Oh, that looks kind of cool. All right, so you can already see like the possibilities just are endless of these simulations of what you can do. Okay, so let's move on though. I want to add more particles into this. So we're going to grab a sphere, and again we can leave that as a primitive. But I do want to drag it up, and with the particles it's kind of hard to see. Let's put it about there, I think. So I want you to realize something, that because we are using this matrix to clone our thinking particles onto the vertices, you can quickly realize that the design of the vertices where they are is going to affect our patterns down below. If you remember the intro, the faces had different patterns. It's because I used different patterns to the objects falling. So let's go into our sphere and let's give it about 135 radius, and let's say 60 segments because we want a lot of particles. And let's do a icosahedron. Okay. Now, um, we have to go through the same process we went through before. So let's go back up to our simulation thinking particles. So we need new particle geometry because we want this to be an entirely different set of particles. So I'm going to put sphere. And one thing we have to do is create another particle group as well. And we're going to name it, oh, I've already screwed up. So let's make this cone, and that will propagate through the rest. Like if we check this, oh, that's right, there, it shows cones. So all those changes are made through Cinema. Oh, and let's go ahead and put it in the sphere. All right, and let's make this kind of a bluish tealy. No, actually, let's make it a, yeah, let's make it, I don't care. Okay, I'm just doing this so we can see it easier. Okay, so we need our particle group. We need to tell that these particles are the sphere particles. Okay, and this should still be our cone particles. So let's change the name. I don't know how I screwed that up so bad. Okay, now we have to go in. Let's pull this up. Well, we don't need to do that. Go into our particles. Now, you can just take all these and you can control drag to copy, okay? And then start arranging them. But let's go ahead and just set it up from the start again, because it's a good idea to get in the habit, and then pretty much it becomes muscle memory to put in the right things. So first we need the P-pass, all right? And again, it's set to all. We want to tell it to do sphere, all right? And let's go into the basic tab and click that color. So now we can just see at a glance. Now, I'm going to use some of these same deflectors, okay? So I'm going to, and I need the gravity. And you may say, well, why do you need gravity again? Well, actually, well, it's how thinking particles works. But there is a big advantage to it, okay? So if we hook this up, all right, now we have a separate gravity control for these particles. We have a separate deflector controls for these particles. So all of a sudden, you know, we can start changing those things, okay? But let's get our particles set up first. So now we need another matrix object. So we're going to go into Mograph, get a matrix. We'll bring it down here, and we probably should start naming these as well. This one is cone. This one is sphere. Okay. So the sphere, I'm going to come back and do the same thing. Okay, so now we've got our object field. We need to drag our, I have to think a minute. Okay, we want to clone onto our sphere. Okay, so there's our matrices. We want to change that to thinking particles. And we want to make sure we drag the sphere group in there. So the colors are also a nice indication. So as soon as, like before I dragged that in there, you saw that they were white. Oh, now it's not going to remember it because I changed it. So that's the other thing about thinking particles. You see now they're back to white. If you don't refresh it, it will remember its previous state. Anyway, the point is that when you have these colors designated, you immediately can see that you're on the right track when you drag your group in there, and now they've turned blue. Okay, so now you know that your blue things, your blue particles are working. And I'm going to turn off those matrices so we don't have to look at those. And I'm going to go back in here and make sure we have a deflector plane. All right, so let's see what this looks like. So now these blue particles are only going to react to the plane because that's all we've set up. And so now we've got this kind of crazy looking sphere expanding and stretching. Okay, so let's give that blue particles a little more variation. So right now the gravity is set the same as the cone, but let's make it, I don't know, let's make it drop a little slower on the blue particles. And our deflector plane, actually, let's make it drop faster. I want them to come down through there. That would make more sense. Oops, not that fast. Let's make that 140. We'll try that. And then this deflector plane, let's reduce the bounce so they don't go. I'm trying to get variation between how they're bouncing and the red particles are bouncing. I don't want them to be the same. And let's add in the hemisphere. Okay. I'm going to just control drag that to copy it because that doesn't change. We're just telling the blue particles now that they have to react to the hemisphere. But let's make it very different. Let's make it a little less dynamic. Say 40 and 30, and we want it to move quite a bit. So let's just give it a little bit of friction, 20. Let's hit play, see what this looks like. There, yeah, see it's falling through the cone now, and I like that. Okay, something didn't happen though. Did I not hook those up? Okay, it didn't react to that hemisphere. Oh, no, no, no. I know what I did wrong. Okay. It's not wrong. It's just we have to add in. We want to add in the sphere. We need this center sphere to push those particles out. So let's just control drag. And we'll go ahead and, even though that has animation on it, and I'm going to arrange these the same just so that when I look down there, I'm not changing the wrong thing. All right, and we're just going to hook that up. And that has the animation on it, but let's see, that could be cool. So that everything kind of explodes at the same time. Yeah, there we go. Now we got something more going on. And that's why I like the gravity being different. This sphere is already starting to pull back down before the cone. And so we got, pretty cool simulation going on. All right, so let's, because as you also know, if you've messed around with thinking particles, nothing's going to render but our geometry right now, okay? Which we absolutely don't want to render. So let's go in and just hide from render our objects. Okay. Okay, so let's create a couple of materials. And the materials you use, of course, are hair materials. All right. So there's a couple of things I do right off the bat with this is I get rid of one of these knots because I don't want them to change. And this is for our red particles. So that's close enough. All right. The specular, you can decide. I'm going to turn it off. The thickness, make sure that the tip and the root are both 1. Okay. And we're going to apply that to the cone. All right. And we're going to render and nothing. And that's because, and you apply it to the particle geometry. Okay. And so you want to right click and come down to hair tags and render tag. Okay. And so you don't have to do anything with it. But these are the steps with thinking particles that get a little annoying, but it's understandable. Okay, so these are our particles, and we have render, and you can make them larger if you want. I like the 1 because of what we're going to add next, but you certainly, can make them bigger. And maybe I should make them bigger just for our purposes of being able to see this thing. Make it 1.5 and 1.5. Okay, and so there we go. So that should show up better. Okay, so we need to do the same thing. I'm going to control drag this to create a second material that I'm going to change to this blue color. Okay, and again, we have to go through this process, put it on the sphere geometry, particle geometry, and get hair tag and come down to render. And now we should have everything. Okay, so now to give these particles a little more gusto, we want to add some tracer objects, okay? So in order to add a tracer to this geometry, to the particles rather, the particle geometry, you don't choose this particle geometry, okay? You have to choose the cone matrix. And if you choose that and go up here to tracer, okay, trace paths, blah, 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 everything really pretty much the same. And I am going to turn off our sphere geometry for a second. It's going to stay there. Well, all right, let's go back. No, it's still not going to. Okay, well, I guess we're stuck with it. Okay, so now you can see that our cone is tracing paths, all right? These white lines, this mass of white lines. Okay, all right. So now we got some crazy stuff going on with that. All right, so of course that's not going to render either. And what we need to do, oh, so the spheres didn't. Okay, so it just doesn't hide it in the viewport. Anyway, so let's take our hair material. Just I'm going to just do a drag and click it. Actually, I'll put it back here. And I'm going to make this a kind of a deep blue. Kind of this, like that there. And the thickness, I found that I'm going to take it down to like 0.03. You really want it thin so it doesn't just look like a line. It starts to almost look like a veil or something, or a light trail. I'm going to put it on there. And I am going to put the tracer below, and it could have just gone right below, but I'll put it down here below the cone matrix because that's how it's going to read in the object manager because the tracer is referencing the cone. Okay, it needs to come second. Anyway, let's render that. And all of a sudden, we've got this cool glow going on. All right. And maybe for the, when you're rendering this at 1080p or whatever, you don't need these lines really big. But for this recording, let's see what that looks like. That looks like not good at all. What did I do? Turn something up. Oh, I see what I did. I'm going to let this run through a little longer. Okay. Yeah. See, the lines get kind of intense, and it's just because the size looks good here, sort of. But when you're rendering, like I was saying, at full res, up large, you really don't need it to be that strong. But we'll go ahead and leave it for now. So one thing that I kind of want to do here is I want to set a limit on this. And I want to set the limit from the end. Okay? So what it's going to do is it's going to draw out, but we're going to stop it at a certain point. And it's kind of cool because it creates this undulating effect. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put in 80. I think this refers to centimeters, but I'm not sure. Okay, so now you're going to still see those white lines coming down quite a ways. But let's let this run a little bit till we get past that. There. Now you can see them starting to draw down a little. Now if we render, okay, we're going to get those lines. They're just, well, not there. Let's get it above. Oh, no, they're redrawing. They're redrawing. Okay. Okay. But that's looking pretty cool. But what'll happen is as these things fly out, the trails will end. They won't just stay there like a web. There, you can see that pulling up. Let's see what that looks like. So you got some kind of cool variations going on. And let's go ahead and do the same thing with the sphere. So I'm going to select the sphere matrix object. I'm going to go up to Mograph, get a tracer, and again, probably need to Combi. Yeah, that's not right. All right. And Okay, and we'll do the same thing here. And I don't know. I guess we'll maybe do let's just do a deeper blue or something. I don't know. Let's do purple. Okay. All right. All right. And thickness, we've got that set. Now we need to, why does that look, no, that's because it's not set. 0.05, 0.05, now it's set. And we want to put that on the sphere tracer. Now, I have no idea why this will render without the render tag, but it does. So, but the particles will not. They need this little hair tag, render tag. Okay, so now we've got some like crazy stuff going on. But I think what we want to do is go ahead and limit our tracer here as well. And let's make it even shorter. So we want it from the end, and I don't know, let's make it about half, 40. Okay. Okay, so you can see how different this even looks from the video at the beginning, because everything you change affects the outcome of this. And of course, the longer this runs, like I picked up mine part way in, but the longer this runs, the more variation you're going to get because of the way these bounces are. They don't always bounce the same. So you get some amazing, amazing designs. And the cool thing to me about this is that, I mean, it's relatively easy to set up, but there are a lot of steps to remember once you get the steps down. But there is so much you can do with this. Like right now, I've used a sphere down here, but in the face of the cosmos, these were faces, geometry. And every object, like a cone, you can change the diameter of the bottom is going to affect how the particles hit. You can add more particles like this sphere. We could actually add in even more, and it's going to slow things down a little, but it's going fast enough. And there's just so many variations. You can just constantly keep changing this. And not only that, and I've just used the same reflector or the same deflectors, but you could change the deflectors. I even had one experiment what I did with Mograph type, so that these things came down and exploded on the type in pieces, like altered in how in their dropping. So it didn't reveal the type all at once. It revealed it over, I don't know, like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So anyway, and the other thing is we've only used just a few of the parameters in these deflectors. Like this energy thing gives more boost. Let's go ahead and say the sphere. Let's give that, let's say 30 energy. The variation is going to make them bounce differently. So if you want to try to retain a shape, which is really cool about this, like you can bounce a shape and it'll stay that shape. but if you put in variation, it'll start to change. If you put in chaos, it'll change a lot. And this velocity inheritance, so let's just do a real quick thing. We'll do it with just the blue sphere. If you hold Shift and Control and just click in that keyframe window, it'll remove those keyframes. So in order for this to work, we need to put friction at about 100. You get rid of the energy. And let's just put the bounce at 0. So now these blue particles are going to come down. They're going to hit that sphere, all right, and stick to it. I got to see where these where the blue particles intersect that sphere. Okay, so after about, after that bounces up, so 100. Okay, see now those are stuck. They're not shooting out like the red ones. So at that point, let's go at 100. Take the sphere and animate the rotation. So we're going to make it kind of a fast rotation. And we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. Well, actually, let's make it 180. Okay. So now, go back. Let's go into our sphere. And let's make this, let's make it, 100. And you can go, I don't know what the limit is, but, I've got it over 100. Maybe that's too much, though. Okay. All right. Now, see what happens when these blue particles come down. I wish these simulations waiting for this to happen didn't take so long, but here we go. So now the particles should stick to the sphere and turn and throws them out against that other thing. Actually, let's just disconnect one thing on that so we can really see those particles come out. Let's just disconnect the hemisphere. So now it won't bounce. The deflector won't work for those blue particles. How cool is that? Oh my God. It just, and that's the velocity inheritance. So what's happening is the particles are inheriting the velocity of the sphere, okay, creating this great explosion of particles and lines and everything else. So anyway, I think you get the idea. There's so much here. I barely scratched even a little bit of the surface on what you can do with this. And like I said, I mean, being able to work with these matrix objects and clone these particles onto different objects is really cool. It's a quick way to get some particles going, and there's so much you can do with it. Anyway, so the tutorial ran a little longer than I hoped. I hope you enjoyed it, and have some fun with this. If you happen to create something and put it on YouTube, like send me a link. I'd love to see what you do with this because there's just so many possibilities. And you can just keep adding. We only added two groups. You can just keep adding groups in there too. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope you had fun with this. Thanks, and take care.